Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome to the Thursday night class. This is going to be part two of the class we began last week. On the Maimer Kodesh, Yisroel, Lashem, Reishis Tvuasa. Israel is holy for God, the beginning of its grain. So last week we began, and it's a discourse in the book of Or HaTorah, which is from the Tzemach Tzedek, third Chabad Rebbe. We also said that it could be that this is really a discourse of the Rebbe Marash, fourth Rebbe, because some place it says that it was mistakenly said by that it's attributed to the Tzemach Tzedek, but it is printed in our Torah. It's also printed, as we discussed, in the Maimer Torah Shmuel. I forgot which year. I don't have that open in front of me right now. But in any case, over here, it's a verse in last week's Haftorah that we read, Pashas Pinchas. It says that Israel is holy to God, the beginning of its grain. And we brought what it says in the teachings of Eliyahu Hanavi, that there are two things that are called rashis. The Israel is called first, and the Torah is called first. And then there was a question, which one is first of the first? And Eliyahu says, most people will say that the Torah comes first, but I say that the Jewish souls come before everything. And he also brought the same from the Midrash. So to understand what does this mean, the thought of Israel comes before everything. We'll understand all of this to understand why is the Torah called grain and why are the Jewish people called the beginning of his grain? What is the idea of grain? And when we spoke, as we mentioned, that there is also, when we speak about grain, the verse says it in one way, but it's read the other way. We read it as if it would be written his grain, but it is actually stated, the way it is written in the actual words is as if it's written her grain. Tvuasa or tvuasai, and we asked what's the difference between his grain and her grain, which means tvuas hay or tvuas vav, the tvua, the grain of the hay or the grain of the vav. Okay, to understand this whole thing, he began another thing, which was why are all the holidays of Israel, of the Jewish people, why is all the holidays of the Torah associated with the seasons of the produce, the crop, the condition of the crop. You have Pesach is at the time of Chodesh Aviv, the time of the ripening, and as we discussed last week, it means the ripening of the barley. The barley becomes ripe first, and then after that, a while later, on Shavuos is the time of the cutting of the wheat, Chag HaKatzir. That's how the Torah refers to it. And finally, the holiday of Sukkot, of Sukkot, is at the time of the gathering of the grains. When you gather all year long, it's been out in the fields to dry, and then you gather it in. The question we learned is, why would we make such a to-do about grains? And what happens if people are not farmers? Like, how do we relate to these three times of festivity? So obviously we explained that's because this has a spiritual meaning as well. And these particular times of the year are the time of the growing of the spiritual produce, not just physical produce. And the reason why the physical produce actually reaches a certain stage at these particular times is because that's derived from the spiritual. It's not like that's the way it is in the physical realm and probably it has some spiritual source. No, it's because this is the way it is spiritually. That's the reason why it also manifests physically in this world, because the physical is an outcome of the spiritual. So we have to understand what is this idea of the spiritual growth of the crop. Idea of crop in general. What does it mean in the realm of spirituality? What is this produce that's growing and that we're benefiting from? Right? The barley, the wheat, this is what makes up our food, our diet. So spiritually, what does it mean? The diet of these foods. So to understand this, I'm doing a brief review of what we learned last week. If you want to learn at length, look at last week's class, part 1. So we learned that we find that we find that the exile is compared to a planting, a sowing of seeds. Because the Talmud tells us in Tractate Pesachim, there's a verse that says, I have planted Vizerati Hali, I planted her for me. God says, I planted her. Who is the her? The her are the Jewish people, God's bride. And Hashem says, I planted her in the land, Ba'aretz, in the land. So the sages say that is referring to the time of exile. Because in the time of exile, God scattered, just like when a person throws the seeds all over the field, Hashem takes the Jewish people and throws them all over the world. But God is really planting. And just like when you're planting, the intention is that you'll get back the yield of the grains, and the crop will be far more than the investment, far more than the actual seeds than the kernels that have been put out. So too, God is also seeking a profit. What's the profit? The profit, we learned, is the gain that there is the converts. Remember, we learned last week that God sent the Jewish people across the whole world to attract converts. He asked the question. We know that in Judaism, he challenges that, because in Judaism we know it's not one of the things that we do is proselytize and look for converts. If there's a convert, there's a convert. And as we discussed last week, actually we make it quite difficult for someone to convert. We don't have an easy inclusion process. It's pretty difficult to get in. If you're very persistent, you'll get in, but it's difficult. It's hard to do it the halachic way, which is the only way to do it. It's not easy. So if that's and therefore we haven't had that many converts. The Jewish people remain still the greatest minority. And the Jewish religion doesn't boast most followers. Actually, and we're not looking, and it's not, it's never been that way. And after Moshiach will come, Judaism will be recognized as the ultimate truth. But we've never been looking for that popularity. That wasn't the thing. So what is the meaning of these converts? So we explained earlier that the significance of the converts, which are the crop that grows when God scatters the Jewish people around the world, is really that there is certain sparks of holiness. That those sparks of holiness are scattered and embedded in the entire world, in all the countries and in all physical aspects of every place in every world. And these sparks, we discussed last week, originate at a very, very high place, a much higher godliness than there is in the regular, ordinary channels of holiness. There is channels of holiness, but the channels of holiness are a very limited godly light. Very limited, very, very measured, very much adjusted. The real infinity of God, the infinite lights, the world can't handle. And the only way our finite time and space world can handle those infinite, but those lights, yet the infinite lights, are meant to eventually reveal itself and come into the world, and that the world will be a vessel for them. But in order for the worlds to be a vessel, to be able to receive infinite revelation from God, it requires a process. And God, in his infinite wisdom, gave us the proper exercises to be able to strengthen ourselves to be able to receive infinity. And how is that? Because Hashem hid tiny little fragments of sparks of that infinite original light, very potent light. Hashem hid it by a process of shattering vessels, Kabbalistic concept, where those tiny little fragments were scattered across the world, and primarily in the darkest of places. In other words, places that are originally not holy, and people that are also not holy. And that's the original state. But then, when we manage to uncover those pieces, those shards, sometimes referred to as sparks, we're able to uncover them and integrate them into holiness, wrestle them away from their unholy setting, from the impurity that has taken this holiness into captivity. So to be able to wrestle this godly spark away from the impure forces, and that is the way we do that is by when the Jewish people come into contact with all these far-flung people, objects, and phenomenon that is across the world. When we come into contact with these things and we use them in our service of God, when we use it to do a mitzvah, to do a divine commandment, to study Torah, or even just to eat food that gives us strength to be able to pray and to be able to connect to God, then we integrate these shards, these sparks, and we become now vessels that are able to handle this infinite light where the spark is connected to. And we're ready for the great grand download of infinity that is going to reveal itself only in the time of Moshiach. So now, until the time of the redemption, what are we doing? We're seasoning the world. But as long as the Jews were in Jerusalem, as long as the Jews were only in the land of Israel, we wouldn't have access to the sparks of holiness that are in Australia. We wouldn't have access to the sparks of holiness that are in France and in Germany, in Poland, and in Atlanta, Georgia. In order to be able to get to every one of these places, God drove the Jewish people into exile, pretended it's because of our sins. And it's not like it wasn't sins. There were sins, but why did we sin? We sinned because we had to sin, so you have an excuse to chase us out and get it and go out. And it's like a father sometimes who sees his child needs toughening up, but he doesn't have the heart to send his kid out of the house. Kid is in the house. So he has to bring about something that causes the child to mess up. So now the father has an excuse to kick him out of the house. Kicks him out of the house with the intention for the kid's benefit. That he's going to be on his own. He's not going to be dependent on his mom and dad. He's going to learn how to have to fend for himself. He's going to become much stronger. God wants the Jewish people to become so strong that we should be able to handle the pure infinity, unadulterated infinite light. So he forces us out of the land of Israel, forces us to toughen up in the exile. But more than anything, he buried treasures of his deepest infinite light in the darkest of places. In those areas of the world that are most ignorant of the divine and of monotheism and the belief in God and so on and so forth. And God orchestrates the exile is that he keeps on chasing us around from place to place. He didn't leave the Jewish people staying in one place forever. As soon as we built up, sadly, major communities and centers, we had to pack our bags and leave. We had expulsions, we had pogroms, we had whatnot that kept us on the move. The migration was continuous. And the reason for that is because this is how we touched, affected, and impacted every place in the world. And and that's where we find, you remember we learned something really beautiful last week. The first experience of that was even before we received the Torah, when we went down to Egypt. That's actually when we collected the most sparks, because the most sparks were buried in the area of the Middle East and Egypt. For whatever reason, divine plan. And we spent 210 years in Egypt. But when we went into Egypt, it says that Yaakov blessed Pharaoh, gave Pharaoh a blessing. Why did he bless him? So we learned last week that the point of the blessing was to condition when Yaakov, our patriarch Yaakov, blessed Pharaoh, he conditioned and seasoned Pharaoh that he should be elevatable and that that the sparks that are inside of Pharaoh and in his kingdom should be extractable. He loosened the teeth. Like, go to a dentist sometimes, they give a little loosen it, so then later they can yank it out. So the blessing itself had this effect that it kind of, Yaakov, who was a chariot to God, his blessing was incredibly potent. And it penetrated the king's soul, the soul of Pharaoh. He basically dropped a little pill into Paro, something very intense. He injected in him. He gave him an injection. And that injection began to spread from Pharaoh the king into all of his government officials and eventually into all of his people. And what they did, and that's what, it's amazing, and that's what caused them to torment the Jewish people. But by them tormenting the Jewish people, they didn't realize that they were releasing the sparks. They were releasing all this incredible, potent, powerful, divine light that was held in captivity in Egypt, that which made Egypt so powerful, but since it was still in an unredeemed state, they were the most corrupt society. So they were powerful and corrupt. So the job was to extract all that energy and power from them, and then take that energy and then build that into the holy, godly world that the Jewish people began building at the time of the Exodus. And they went out with the great wealth of Egypt, and they planted that great wealth into the Mishkan, which is the home of God, and this became kind of the foundation for the entire Jewish experience as a people throughout the ages. So we see that the Judaism was built on the wealth of the nations. And that wealth of the nation means the spiritual wealth that was then taken. So this is the idea of planting and getting back something greater in return. This is a huge return for the investment, because what he's investing is small change. And I know I'm saying something very extreme over here. The Jewish souls are considered small change. The godliness of the Jewish soul is considered pennies in comparison to the intense, immense, godly lights that are hidden and under a husk, in the pockets of darkness. Not just the pockets, in the places of darkness across the world. When I say darkness, I mean spiritual darkness. And when we come into contact with them, we extract that. That's the growth. Now we learned, however, and we continued into the next chapter, that when you plant seeds in the ground, there is a precondition. You don't put in a seed and tomorrow it grows. When you put in a seed, if they give it time, why does it need time? Because the seed has to disintegrate and become enmeshed in the earth. It has to almost be completely, maybe not just almost, it has to turn into soil. The seed rots, decays, and in other words, the soil eats up the seed. And then, only then, does the seed communicate with the soil, with the enormous, divine, potent power that God put into the soil to be able to produce a huge production, a huge amount. So what the seed does is really speaks. The seed is basically just speaking to the soil, asking for the soil for a great output of whatever the seed is made out of. Because the soil has a potential. First of all, it has a potential the soil has a potential just to be silent and not to give anything out, not to express itself, not to activate its growing power. The earth can get lazy, if you don't speak to it, if you don't call forth that it should grow, it doesn't grow, and if it does grow, it grows like very, very poor and inferior quality stuff. It produces, compared to like what it could produce, it produces pretty much junk. I mean weeds and stuff, nothing of that is edible, nothing that's nutritious. The real quality that the earth is able to produce, beautiful plums and peaches and grain and delicious avocados and all kinds of vegetables and everything, you name it. That stuff is not going to come out unless you're going to call it forth. You have to talk to the earth and wake it up. How do you wake it up? You put a seed in. Now, how does the seed communicate? The seed rots, and if you put in was a lemon, it tells the earth, we want lemons. So the earth sours up and produces a lemon tree with hundreds of lemons from one seed. And then if you put in wheat, that's what's going to come out. So now the same concept exists spiritually as well. In order for the Jewish people to be able to produce this great produce during the time of exile. Now, by the way, that's the theme of this week's Torah portion. That it says the Jews traveled. Matzah talks about the 42 travels and encampments that they went throughout the exile. These travels are a journey into the desert, which represented the journey, even though this is referring to the journey of the Jewish people when they went out of Egypt to the land of Israel, to the promised land, and they traveled through a desert. What this really is symbolic of, these 42 different journeys the Torah lists, is symbolic of thousands of years of Jewish migration from place to place to place to place, but it's all leading us to the promised land. What's the promised land? The promised land is the revelation of Moshiach. All the great infinite godly light that we discussed earlier from this infinite, incredible place, which is which we know is referred to over here, the lights of Keser. Keser is the crown, the lights of the Ein Sof. The world has not seen any of that light yet. It's going to manifest and reveal itself once the third temple is built. Mashiach is fully here. Huh? Why? That could be it. It says that this is an incredible revelation that's going to reveal, not just as light, it's going to be energy and power and whatever the world is going to be able to. It's coming from Keser, from the Ein Sof. So its revelation is really going to be then. That's when we're going to experience this infinity. That's the end of the exile. That's the purpose of the exile to begin with. However, what we're going to learn today is how a little bit of that awesome light that's going to be revealed in the days of Mashiach, a little ray of it, has to be revealed even now as well. Because or else we would lose. If you give someone a job and they can only reap the effects of the job thousands of years, not in their lifetime, then people will lose motivation. So to keep the people interested, you have to give them a little lick. You have to give them a little taste of what they're producing. And that's what God does 3 times of the year. 3 times of the year on the 3 festivals. The reason it's a festival is because there is a great spiritual revelation. And that spiritual revelation, it's not just a revelation, it's what was produced from the labors of uncovering these sparks in the exile. And that's what produces the crop. What's the crop? The divine revelation. And even today's days, we know that on these great holidays, if we prepare properly and we tune in and we're spiritually sensitive, we can experience enormous increased godly consciousness and revelation on the holidays, on the pilgrimage holidays. That's why we spend extra time in shul praying, and we have certain mitzvahs on every holiday. These are all to open us up to experiences that ordinarily on another day you can't experience. Now we'll understand why the holidays are all at certain completion of the grains of the crops of the produce, because spiritually it's that way. And when it comes the holiday of Passover, something has already, the work that we've done in the few months before Passover has yielded already a spiritual download, which is the first crop. Then when the holiday of Shavuot comes two months later, the yield now, the produce is now in a stage of a much higher level, as we're soon going to see. And we have a higher revelation. Finally, on Sukkot, we get even a greater revelation, because the grains have reached, or the produce has reached the next stage. So just like, and it's physically that way, it's spiritually the same. And now he's going to explain what happens on each holiday. A ray from this smicha, from this growth, meir b'regalim, illuminates and shines on the holidays. We're holding now in the third paragraph, I think, of the Maimer. Yeah, on page 1214. Reish Yodalit, Aleph Reish Yodalit. A ray of this vegetation, meir, shines, b'regalim, on the holidays. And that's why it was set for the grains. Say that regalim in the order of these regalim, of these yom tivs, of these holidays. The first yom tiv is the yom tiv of Matzah. It says by the yom tiv of Matzah that you should make, the Torah is very, very adamant, as we discussed last week, that the holiday of Pesach, of Passover, must be held in the spring. And as we said earlier, Aviv means spring, but more particularly it means at the time of the ripening. Which particular item ripens at that time of the year? Late March, early April. That's the barley. Like it says, that the barley is ripe. That's the time of the ripening of the barley. So what does barley mean spiritually? If physically barley gets done, that must be that in the higher and more spiritual worlds, there is also a yearly growth of barley. And that becomes and that's a spiritual form of nutrition that then becomes something that we eat and feeds us and satiates us. So what is that? He's going to explain the difference between barley and wheat, as we're going to see soon. Shavuot, which is the next holiday, is the holiday associated with wheat. It's the time of the cutting of the wheat. This first holiday, Passover, is the time of the ripening of the barley. So what is barley? In Hebrew, we know everything is hinted to in the name. Now, by the way, it's actually what we're going to learn right now is so beautiful and so magnificent and so incredible. He says that everything is hinted to in the name. So let's analyze the name. In Sa'ira, the name of that the Torah uses for barley is made up, the Zohar says, of two words. Hubchinas shi'ur hay. Shi'ur means a measure of hay. Something called shiurim means measurements. Like people say, what is the shiur of a mikvah? How much water do you need in a mikvah? What is the shiur of matzah you need to eat on Pesach by night? What is the measurement? What's the smallest shiur, like you say, for a shiur is a measurement. So the word sa'ora means the measurement, the Zohar says, of the hay. What does it mean, the measuring of the hay? So I'll tell you, I'll drop it right away before we get into the details, so we don't get lost in the explanation. So you won't lose the forest for the trees. It's spectacular. What it means is the measured godliness that's responsible for a finite world. in every single part, in every creature, and in every world, and every being, every type of creature and every type of being of every world is enlivened and and it is sustained, and it is brought into existence by a godly life force. Now, the godliness that creates an apple is a different energy and has different qualities, so to speak, than the godly life force that creates a pear. Although a pear and an apple are not that far from each other, but they're different, two different fruit. So it's a different energy. And obviously a citrus fruit, like an orange and a lemon and something like that, is even more different, so to speak. If the physical outcome is different, then the spiritual energy that flows in it is also different. Now, what differentiates undefined infinite light? God is infinite. His energy is infinite. So what gives this infinite multiplicity or variation to an otherwise simple, undefined, infinite energy? So there is a system of restraint, of tzimtzum, of contraction, where God holds back on his simple, infinite light, filters it, and through a system of incredible and almost endless filtration, the filter after the filter after filter reduces and brings out all the infinite variations of potential. But obviously, everybody understands that if one was to show up to God, while God is utterly infinite before he does anything, and say, God, can you make an apple? God, for sure I can make an apple. Here's an apple. Right. So we understand that the potential of producing an apple, that hypothetically, in the infinite light, that potential is there. Right. And then you can ask for a carrot, very different than an apple. God will make you a carrot. He'll bring out. So which means that in the infinite potential, there's an infinite potential for everything. It's Ein Sof and anything. But on that level, it's everything. It's nothing and it's everything. So, but when God creates the world, he creates so then what happens is he filters his life force so that each particular potential and power comes out on its own. And that energy, although it's divine, it's not yet the creation, it's the energy that brings about the carrot, it's the energy that creates the kiwi, it's the energy that creates the melon, or whatever it is. It's all divine, but it's a divine specification, where something specific came out from a non-specific and all-inclusive infinite power. So that filtration process is called barley, the spiritual idea of barley. Why? Because barley stands for, the Zohar says, shiur hey, the measurements that come from the letter hey. Because that entire, what's it called again? The entire file that contains all of the creations that there are. I'm not even talking, I just was talking about fruits and vegetables. But the entire file, imagine there's this one file that has in it every single description of every plant, tree, animal, insect, and all the and everything. That one big folder, so to speak. that entire folder that contains all the energy of the physical universe is all just, and not only the physical universe, but the spiritual worlds as well. Believe it or not, it's all one folder, and that folder is a hay. What is that hay? One breath. What is a hay? Is a letter, the Hebrew letter hay? It's a breath. It's all stemming from one breath of the infinite. That breath becomes chopped up in a gazillion different formations. And those little crumbs, or those little offshoots, and filtered of that just that one little breath, that manifests as all the energy and all the different styles of energy that there is in creating everything in creation. Hay is the measurement of the hay. What does hay mean? Eila told us these are the offspring bihibara when he created it. So the barley we're going to see soon is that on Passover, what does it mean? Is the time in the year when we can suddenly see the divine energy that creates and sustains us. Generally, even though there is a godly energy that is making the orange, that's making an apple, that's creating a tree, that's making a butterfly, or that's creating a zebra. Each particular type of energy, we're not, the creations are so thick and dense, they don't allow you even to notice that there is a spiritual life force over here. So you get to see the creation, but not the created light that's in the creation, not the divine that's in the creation. And on Passover, God, there is revelation. And what's the revelation? That one can see the measured energy that creates and sustains the creation. See it. We don't really see it yet, but we're able to sense it in our souls more than we are able to sense it any other time of the year. And in other words, we can feel and sense that God is the power of our life and the source of all of our blessings, and to literally see the connection. And that means discovering the barley. What's the barley? The barley is the measuring power that there is to take one singular breath of God that has infinite potential and slice it up in every single way. That's sheer, putting measure on the hay. And what's the hay? Hay is the breath. And we're going to, let me add one more thing. What does that have to do with breath? Because really, we're speaking about this God's infinite power to create all the various different creations. God emanates like a human. And just like when a human being has rich ideas, like you have concepts, you have ideas, you have feelings, you have whatever, there's a rich, but in order for you to be able to communicate this in a cohesive manner, in a structured manner to someone else, you can't just pour your emotions onto someone. You can't pour. The way to do that is you put it through you have to verbalize it. You have to articulate it in words. And how does articulation in words work? And so too God also does that. When God articulates anything of his infinite power into actualization, into actual creation. So God uses, similar to the human, speech. Just like we take somebody. But how does speech work? Speech has two components to speech. Number one, speech has a component of sound. And in order to create sound, you need breath. So speech is made up of breath. But breath is just, it's just a sound that's not yet, it's not particularized. When that breath reaches the vocal cords, reaches the five organs of speech, also five. The letter hey represents breath. because when you say it's the one letter that has no interference of the vocal cords. The letter hey is just really the sound, just plain breath. But then in order to, that's why we say the hey represents breath. But then, in order to particularize the breath, how does speech work? The breath goes into the mouth. The mouth has 5 organs, and those 5 organs act as powers that interfere with the breath. They kind of obstruct the flow. And by obstructing the flow, they cause the sound to bounce off in the various different ways, which creates the particular formation of letters. Okay, we once discussed earlier that really the letters are really coming from a much deeper place, but in the physical dynamics of it, it's taking place as the breath meets the mouth, and the way it's working is, what is the job of the 5 organs of speech, which are the tongue, the lips, the palate, the teeth, and the throat? What's its job? Its job is to measure out the breath, to block the breath, to filter the breath, not to allow just a plain sound to come out, but a very specific sound. Now remember, always, specification always comes from contraction and filtration and limiting, which means you have to filter out the rest and then just give something precise and narrow. That's the power of 5 powers of speech. And that is called shiur hey, the measure of the hey. Because God creates and sustains all of creation just with one letter hey. Imagine the cosmos only with a hey. And that indicates, now there's another point over here, that indicates how insignificant the entire file that contains all of creation is. Because it's nothing more than one breath. Imagine a human being who has the potential for who knows what. How much of a person's being is there in one breath? Nothing. And here we're saying God breathes one breath and he creates the entire universe. But in order for that breath to become particular and detailed, and therefore create, as we discussed earlier, zebras and butterflies and tomatoes and oranges and cauliflower and humans and this type of human and that type of human and rain and fire and mountains and volcanoes and stars and galaxies and all the billions and gazillions of imaginable amount of, it's all coming from the different combinations of energy, which are all manifestations of that one breath. I have to say that God is pretty super cool. But that entire file is the hay. The hay is the breath. And the shiur, the measuring, are the letters that come out from the hay that take that simple breath and turn it into various different words. The L sound, the M sound, the D sound, and the different pronunciations. All of this comes out, and that forms different combinations of letters. And we know that these letters are literally the DNA of all of the creation. The code, the creator's code, the code of the universe, of the physical universe. It's divine words. And its source is one hay. That's, you never look at barley the same again, huh? Barley? Barely barley. What's the barley? The barley, the Zohar says, represents this power. Now this hay is called malchut. It's the power of divine kingship. That's the power of divine speech. Sa'ira. Now, what does it mean that on Passover, on Pesach, is the ripening of the barley? It means that we have a revelation of this barley, which means we can suddenly feel that everything in our life is flowing and being sustained and created from divinity, from the divine power. That's what reveals itself on Passover, on Pesach. However, we're going to see that that's a very, very limited revelation of God. Imagine if you were able to go into that file that contains the entire cosmic order, the entire universe, and leaf through that energy, touch that energy. You would think that's not inferior. That's like super big. That's super awesome. Yes, but that's just making contact with the most nether part of God, so to speak. His one breath, his deeper self, that is much higher than his breath, his inner self, that you're going to have to wait for the wheat to come. The wheat is the next crop that reveals itself, much, much higher than the barley. And that reveals itself only a few months later when the Torah is given. Now that you have that, you have kind of a synopsis of where this discourse is going, and we're going to learn it now inside. The Inyan we said, okay, so Shir Hey, that's the Piddish Hey. What does it mean? The letter Hey, like it says, Eila Toldos. These are the Eila Toldos. These are this is the chronicles of Shemayim va'aretz, of the heavens and earth, Bihi bara, when he created them. And the sages say that this means Behei bara, that God created the worlds with the letter Hey. With a Hey, he created them. Not just when he created them, but with a Hey, he created them. That our world, means the physical universe, was created with the letter Hey. And in the Midrash, Tanchuma, it says, Amru lama nivra olam hazeh behei. Why did God create the world with our world with a Hey? Ma Hey adam matziyah metoich piv. So the Midrash gives an explanation. It says, just like the letter Hey, a person emanates that letter, expresses that letter from his mouth. Ein bo lo rechish sfasayim, doesn't have to move his lips. V'lo charitzis Lashem, he doesn't have to sharpen his tongue. To say a letter takes some effort. Because in every letter you have to at least move around you move around your jaw, your various different mouth organs, mouth components, but not to say the letter Hey. To go, you don't have to move anything. It's the easiest letter. Kach, and so the Midrash says, so too God didn't have to work hard to create the world. Kach loy ba'amal, so too not with toil. V'loy b'yagia, not with sweat or exertion. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu Zolama, did God create his world? V'hainu, and what does that mean? Ki hevel alev sheba ois Hey. That means that the breath of the heart, now the breath is really coming from the lungs and the heart. That's in the letter Hey, who yoiser miyut, is much less. Now, you would think that in the letter, when you say Hey, the only thing that differentiates the letter A from the letter Gimel or the letter Shin or any letter, you would think that over here you're allowing the breath to come out just plain, and over here you're already interjecting into the breath some kind of a obstruction, closing your lips. It's like making movements and that's what's making the letters. But really, it's the same breath. In truth, however, it's not that way. Because when you want to express another letter, any letter, since you're going to have to create that particular sound, which is going to come out only through the movement of the mouth, in order to do that, you have to force the wind out, which causes, and we don't notice this because it's so natural to us, that you're actually, when you're saying any letter besides the letter H, which is the H sound, which is the Hey in Hebrew, if you're saying any other letter, you need to omit stronger breath. But the letter Hey is the easiest letter to express, because not only can you be lazy and not move any of the other organs, the actual breath itself is just it takes less energy out of you to say the Hey. And that's the reason why this applies to God creating the universe. And again, who is less than the rest of the letters. As it is known, it is known that the letter Hey is a light letter that doesn't have a mishush. It doesn't have a substance. And that's why it says that God says, I didn't change by creating the world. Because what do you mean God didn't change? Of course he changed. It says, there's a verse says, I didn't change, God says. What do you mean, of course he changed? Before he created the world, he wasn't creating anything. When he created, he's engaged. So he did change. He's engaged in creating. That's an engagement. That's an involvement. That's an investment. So he's changing. He's now, so the deeper meaning is that he creates the entire world with a utter non-energy. It is an enormous amount of energy from our end, but to God, who God really is, this is a nothing of nothing. It has no change at all in him. God remains exactly before the worlds were created. And God is exactly the same after the worlds are created. After meaning during the duration of creation, when he was actively creating, and also after the worlds exist already, when he's continuing to create it. It's not occupying any space in his radar, because it's being created from a utterly insignificant energy. That's a ray of his light, which is that tiny little Hey. The entire universe. Because the entire evolution of worlds is really only from two letters. Earlier we said the letter Hey, because the letter Hey is responsible for the lower world, for this world. The sages say that the letter Yud, which is a more potent letter, more powerful letter, is the energy that sustains and creates the world to come. But even that, okay, two letters, a Yud, which is a tiny dot, and a Hey, which is the least investment. Like it says, the sages derived this from a verse. It says, Hashem that with Ka, it says God's name of Yud Ke, Havaya of Hashem, of the Lord. Tzur Olamim is the power of the worlds, the power of creation. So the sages say, B'Yud Nivra Olam Haba, with the Yud, the future world was created. And with the letter Hey, this world was created. Just like in general, two letters. Imagine a person's ability to speak. A person says a whole lot of words in their life, a whole lot of words. I don't know if there should be a meter to see how many letters do you say in your life, depending how long a person lives, and the person know what type of yenta they are. A yenta is a talker. So, by depending on how much a person likes to talk, right, you can go on talking endlessly. The two letters. So, just like two letters, compared to a person's overall ability to speak, what are two letters? What kind of value do they have? How much did they exhaust the person to say how much of yourself did you impart into those letters? Not anything significant. That's comparing it to the amount of words we can speak when we are physically alive. How long, depending on a lifetime. But really, if you think about it, it's much bigger than that. The lack of significance of two letters, because what's really talking is your soul, not your body. The soul is really the one who's speaking. And the soul, hypothetically, can talk infinite amount of letters because the soul doesn't die. The soul continues. To speak those letters through a physical mouth, that we can only do during whatever the life is of a person, to 120 years. But the soul itself, which is an eternal being that exists, can go on living forever, and therefore has enough energy to speak on forever. So to that, the significance of 2 letters becomes so much more nothing, insignificant. Now, that's if you're comparing a person's letters, speech, just to the power of speech. Even just to a person's power to speak, 2 letters is meaningless. If you take the power of 2 letters and you measure it up, you equate it, you stand it next to the person's ability to think, which thinking is much richer than speech, or even deeper than that, if to the person's ability to experience emotion, and deeper than that, the person's intelligence. As you go deeper and deeper into the more expansive and incredible powers of the soul, the value of those 2 letters shrink incredibly. If it's possible to shrink nothing, it becomes way, 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 way more nothing. And that's why we say God didn't change, because he created the world from an energy of him that's nothing. You can't even call it energy. Just like 2 letters don't occupy space to speech. And definitely to the essence of the person. How much more so, and way more so, it's understood that these 2 letters that God spoke do not have any significance in comparison to God himself. His very substance. And that's why God says, I haven't changed at all. Okay. So that's where creation comes from the letter Hey. And let's understand, what are we beginning with? Now we're going to take that one breath, and this is going to be sliced into slices, because from that one breath, which is so insignificant, becomes the entire code for the universe and all the universes. That means this one letter of Hey, this one breath, is now going to become gazillions of gazillions of gazillions of combinations of letters. It's like this one letter is going to give birth. This one breath is going to emanate an infinite flow of letters, tiny little letters. And these tiny little letters are going to make up the energy force of all of creation. But in order to take that undefined letter Hey, which we said is a crumb of a crumb of a crumb, it's nothing to God. Yet to the universe, that letter is still a crumb of the infinite, and therefore infinite. So that crumb needs to now be chopped through the power of the barley, shior, the chopper. The barley chops the energy and gives it small, little, tiny slices, and then combines a few slices to create a unique ingredient, which is the word that is the code in Hebrew that creates that creation and that creation. Piddish sa'ira on the word sa'ira, shir Hey, the measure of the Hey. Shebchenes Hey zu, this Hey. Hagam shahevel halev ashaboyu yoiser miut. Even though the hevel halev, the breath of the heart that's in it, is yoiser miut mikom shari yois is less than the rest of the letters. Mikol mokom, nevertheless, bechdei sheyachal yis mebchenes hevel halev the os Hey zeh bchenes havas anivroim. Notwithstanding the fact that we're beginning with only one letter, which is a Hey, and the letter that is the weakest of all letters, because we said earlier, to say a Hey, you have the least energy expended, yet it's way too potent for the worlds to handle. In order for it to actually bring about creations, That one breath now needs to go through a process of chopping it up. Until you can actually bring out that one breath into 22 letters. And then those are the root. Imagine God takes his one breath, puts it through his, so to speak, his mouth, anthropomorphically speaking. God doesn't have a mouth that we know, but still. And that is what does what? Chops it up into 22 different forms of combination. And then those 22 letters become the super building blocks of all of the world. But then that itself now gets diminished and through a whole system where those letters get exchanged with different letters, and then those letters get exchanged again through a system of very complicated system that only God knows, through which he switches up letters back and forth, and all those letters form the gazillion trillion combinations, which would then become the name of every creature, which contains within it the divine energy that creates that creation. And there is exchanges with tumuras. There is a difference between chiluf and tumura. Right now, I'm not. It's exchanges and there's another word for it, and whatever, not in my head right now. As it is known, substitutions. That's what I was looking for. Of exchanges and substitutions. Like it is known from the concept of, it says in Sefer Yetzirah, that there are 231 pathways where letters flow, and these letters interact one with each other. They roll forward and backwards. And on this it says, her husband makes himself known to her. It's a verse in the Exile, which is sung traditionally Friday night, where it's referring to the woman of valor. So who is this woman of valor? Of course, it means to every Jewish woman, and her husband can have his wife in mind as being the woman of valor, because to him she is his woman of valor. But on the greater scale, it's referring to all of the souls of Israel combined together. And on even a higher scale, it's referring to the Shekhinah, who is revealing himself to her, which is his wife, which is the Shekhinah. And the husband is the level. So what does that mean? So it means like this: the hay, that's really the woman. The husband of the woman is what pours into that hay. God's emotions and God's intelligence that pours into the hay. However, the word hay, as he's describing it over here, relates to the actual creations. Sorry, the woman, not the word hay. The woman of it says, Noida Basharim, he reveals himself, Basharim in the gates. And the hay, that's the husband over here. What does that mean? It says the husband reveals himself. Noida, simply means he is known. Again, the simple meaning means her husband is a very known man at the gates. The husband is a big macher. The gates are where the important assemblies took place. Town square was the gates. Right, at the gates, that's where it was important. Her husband is a very renowned person. That's the simple meaning. But spiritually, the Zohar says that the word Noda also means he reveals himself to her. He becomes known to her, her husband. So who's the her here? Over here, the her refers to every single creation. Me, you, everybody, every creature and every being, and including angels as well. Every creature is considered, over here, the woman. The woman in the sense that a woman means a recipient. A man is a bestower and a woman is a recipient. The man is the provider, the woman is the recipient. So in front of God, we're all women. How does God interact with us? How does he make his energy, his infinite energy known to us? How does he flow into us? Basha'arim, through the gates. And what is a gate? A gate is not the entire wall, an entranceway. That's what a sha'arim. Sha'arim is an entranceway. It's a narrow passageway. So God narrows his infinite potential in order to be able to deliver a particular energy to each creature. That's the meaning that her husband, which is the divine, comes down to every creation through a narrow passageway. The gate and the barley, the shiur, is the same idea. Shiur, the measure. Everybody according to his measure. According to the value of the amount that God measures to every creature. From that one breath, which is the superpower for all of creation, now it needs to go through the various different filters to filter it and define it. The ois hey, the hibara, the super big infinite hey of the word bihi baram, when he created them with the hey. Behei baram, that God used the hey to create the world. Now we cannot plug directly into that hay, because we would blow a fuse. We become electrocuted. So what does God do? He gives us only a little measured light. That's the idea of the gate, the entranceway. To each creation, there is a measured flow of energy. Kings. I'm sorry, not kings. Angels, they receive what angels can handle. Over here, he's painting with a very broad brush, because within angels itself is billions and gazillions of levels. But here he's saying angels, what they can handle, u'neshamas b'fnei atzman, and souls, whatever they can handle. And obviously physical creatures, what they can handle. And if there is a surcharge, not a surcharge, what is it called? A surplus of energy, which overwhelms the system ever. If for whatever reason one of the filters break, and the flow of life comes pre-filtered or it's gonna destroy the creation. And when more than what is set shines, then the creation can't receive. Where do we find that? Because even super creations like angels, the angels, which are the big creations, which have enormous capacity, right? Much more than humans. Like stated elsewhere, there's two verses in Psalms. One of them is, how great are your actions, God? The other one is, how many are your actions? What's the difference? Both of them are speaking of God's quality. One says how great, the other one says how many. So it's explained that the greatness of God's activities is seen in the very impressive angels that he creates. They're super impressive, they are big, they are enormous, they have enormous amount of whatever ability. The lower creations, over here you don't see so much the enormity of his creations, but rather the many, how billions and billions and billions of the many expresses itself in the lower creations. So if that's the case, the big, enormous creations are the angels. And yet the sages say that they can only handle if God is restraining himself. Not only himself, he's restraining that one breath. Because as it says, one time God removed one filter and delivered a higher dosage to a group of angels because they misbehaved, and they were blown to smithers. God struck out his tiny pinky. That's what it says. And he burnt them. What does that mean? He struck out his pinky, his small finger. It means he gave them a little bit more than what they're allocated, that they're supposed to receive. They received, even though it was only a pinky that he was giving them, a small little finger, a little more. Now that small finger is the hay, because the 10 fingers are sometimes referred to as the 10 Sefirot. The last of those Sefirot is Malchut, which Malchut is the Shekhinah, which the Shekhinah is the hay. So God stretching out his little finger means within that breath of that one little hay, he forgot to barley it, in fact. He intentionally didn't barley it, which means didn't limit it, and allowed the light to come forth. Not a lot, just a little bit on a higher dosage, and forget about it. He knocked them out. Now, he wants to show you that the little finger is referring to this level of malchus, because the word hakatana, etzba haktana, is also used by Rachel. It says that Yaakov had 2 daughters. One of them was Shem Hagdola Leah. The older one was Leah. Shem Haktana Rachel. And the younger one was Rachel. So we know in Kabbalah mystically that Rachel is the embodiment of the attribute of Malchut, which is the Shekhinah. Leah is the embodiment of a much higher level called the Bina. And that's why Leah is called Hagidola, the great daughter, not only because she was born first, because she had a much higher spiritual root. And Rachel, has a much lower spiritual root, because she's rooted in the level of that one little breath. She's rooted in the hay, Hakatana, the small hay. Hey katana, the small hay. And when it says God put out his little finger, it doesn't mean he put out a big finger. It means that he didn't restrain his little finger enough, which is the hay. The small katana is Rachel, which is the Shekhinah. That's the hay. Behei baram that God created. Shuhei ze'ira, which is the small hay of Hashem's name. And by the way, in the word behi baram, this is also hinted. Sages learn how familiar with the hay he created them. But if you look in the Torah, you'll see that very hay that is in the word behi baram is a minor hay. It's smaller than all the other letters. It's not a regular size letter. It's a shrunken letter. It's a smaller font. And then V'sarfam, he burnt them. These angels couldn't handle it. They couldn't receive it all. And how much more so the rest of the creations. That if angels couldn't handle a surplus of energy, then any creation for sure would go. So the barley is very important. Shiur hay, the measured energy that comes down to sustain the world. I'm going to stop for a second because my eyes are closing, and I think it's bothering me. I don't have my reading glasses. Yeah, hold on. Try 2 tricks. Try caffeine. Let's see where that's going to go. Now, once we know what barley is, we're going to start figuring out what this means. Pesach, on Passover, if you look at historically what happened on the first Passover, the Jews went out of Egypt. How did the going out of Egypt come about? Through incredible divine revelation. But it wasn't just like, okay, they needed miracles to get out of a country that would not allow them to leave. It was holding them in kind of enslaved. So they needed a miracle to beat the Egyptians. And then they got out. So the miracles were only it was like a technical necessity that you needed that. Without those miracles, so God had to reveal himself. But spiritually, it's much deeper than that. The miracles itself that were shown to the Jewish people, that that is it in itself getting out of Egypt, because Egypt is not only a physical location with a whole bunch of evil people, an evil kingdom that was enslaving the Jewish people. It's not only what it was. It's more than that. It's a psychological state. It's a state where you don't see. Mitzrayim means constriction. You're living in such a constricted consciousness that you don't feel at all the supernatural. You don't feel that you take nature superficially on face value, that the nature is all that there is, and not realizing that God is the essence of everything. Don't see that. That's Egypt. So that's being in Egypt. So going out of Egypt, if a person can do that himself, can get out of the constriction, that's great. But sometimes a person is so constricted, they can't take themselves out of their own narrow-mindedness, of their own very, very, what we call it, very limited perspective. So they need to be, God has to loosen the filters and allow more revelation. Not more revelation that will destroy us, like we discussed earlier, but more revelation that we should see, not to receive more energy quantity, but that the energy that's there creating us and making us should be more visible. Now we don't feel it. And that itself takes them psychologically out of Egypt, because now you're sensing that there is that God is the real power of the universe. You're able to bond with God. That means come out of that constriction, of that darkness. And when spiritually we came out of Egypt, physically we also left Egypt, because the physical is only a reflection of the spiritual. And that's the reason why Passover is celebrated at the time when the barley is finished. Finished meaning it reached the point, it completed its growth. That means that right now we were able to experience the divine energy that creates the universe. See it, feel it, and experience it. Pesach on Passover, then it shined into the Jewish people, to be grasped to them in a manner of vision. This that it says, lift up your eyes higher. Lift up your eyes higher. And see who created all of this. It's a verse in Isaiah, I think. It says, lift up your eyes higher. If a person doesn't look, you live, we can live very materialistic. We can live very, very, very blocked. So God calls out to each and every one of us, lift up your eyes, don't look, don't see the expansive view. Sometimes you say, lift up your eyes to the heavens. Because in the heavens, you look at the galaxy, you see the stars. Someone must have made all of this. And that's why it says, and you could point, not just that you can think that or imagine the creator, but you can literally come to a point where you can actually see Mi bara ela, who created this, which means see the divine force that's creating the world. So Passover, God gives us this ability to be able to do exactly this, to lift up your eyes higher and see who created this. It should be grasped. It should be in a manner of vision and recognition. What will you see? You'll see past the superficiality of the creation itself, and you'll see the divine energy that's behind it. The divine godliness that creates from nothing to something, that brings the creation into existence from nothing to something. And he says, being in Egypt, he's looking at the word Mitzrayim. So we said earlier, Mitzrayim means constriction, but more particularly, Mitzrayim comes from the word Meitzar, constriction, on what? Yud Mem. The last two letters of Mitzrayim is Yud Mem. Yud Mem spells, if you change the letter in the reverse order, Yud Mem, and put the Mem before the Yud, is me. Meitzar me means a constriction on the me, on the who. Who's the who? The who is the one who created all of this. What does it say? Lift up your eyes and see who created these, created the creation, creates the universe. So in a healthy state, we feel that there is a creator and can even see that there is a creator. But when we're in a constricted mode, we don't see. And that means being in Egypt. Meitzar me, the constriction on me. It's not just in Egypt. This is the time now that's called between the constrictions, this 3-week period. It's also the time of exile, which represents a time of constriction. Meitzar me, shamaylam, a master, which obscures and hides up me bara elan, the one that creates these. And these is referring to what? Everything that's in front of you. That's these. Now, why particularly Egypt? Why was this constriction in Egypt? Why not in, in any of the other country? Let's think about countries over there. Turkey, could have been Syria. Why did this story happen in Egypt? It was because the Torah refers to Egypt as the nakedness of the land. That means it's the place that is the most impure. Erva also means a little bit the filth of the land. It's not just the nakedness, it's the filth of the land. And that's why it was very polluted. And Egypt was filled with sorcery, black magic, a lot of dark stuff. Denial of God, complete sense of autonomousness. Right? They so full of idolatry. And this is b'chinas ervas haaretz, and also immorality, terrible immorality. So all of that creates a polluted environment. And a polluted environment breeds ego and self-importance. And the ego and the self-importance creates a block that you can't see past yourself, past your own shadow, can't see past yourself. And that's why in Egypt, by them coming into Egypt, it polluted their consciousness so much that they became disconnected, even though they were, the fourth how many generation? Yeah, they were just, directly descendants and very, very close to Abraham, the founder of monotheism. This was their family tradition. They were blocked. They weren't seeing it anymore. They got obscured. Yeah, we said earlier, remember we said that God puts us into exile and the seed has to rot. That's what happened spiritually. They rotted. They lost their godly consciousness. Because Egypt is the impurity of the land, the hell and the hister, it obscured and hid on the divine nothingness. What we call the divine nothingness means the power of God that's in everything that creates and sustains the world. It's called nothingness because it's beyond definition. That is flowing from nothing to create something, which is the physical object. Tamid, all the time, like it says, with God's goodness. He renews every minute of creation. Is the work of creation. At every moment and in every second. The nothingness of the divine is drawn to create, and to enliven, from nothing to something. It can, like it says, and as it says that God, forever your words are to be found in the heaven to create the heavens. That means God is continuously, his energy, the life force, is continuously embedded in creation, continuously speaking and commanding the world into existence. And if the divine energy if God would stop imbuing the world with life, instantly everything will revert to nothing. So really all of existence is nothing more than the divine power. So we should be so super overwhelmed with the consciousness of the force that's creating us. That's the way it should be. But if you're blocked, you don't feel it. You're blocked, you don't feel it at all. Pirush Lazal b'Medrash u'b'Sifra Shabbeinu. So the sages say in Medrash and the Sifra Shabbeinu b'Shem Baal Shem Tov, and in Tanya it says in the name of the Baal Shem Tov, Shadvar Hashem, that the word of God Nitzav Tamid b'Shamayim stands always in heaven, constantly Lach Yosei, to enliven it. And so it's in all creations, like we said earlier about the barley. It's the, of course, is a general hay, and then each creation receives its particularized energy. But that energy is there every second to create it. And if it would have gone away even for an instant, everything would revert to nothing. So we should really be so conscious of it. So much so, we should only feel the energy that's creating us and not even feel ourselves at all. But what happens when we're living in Egypt? The opposite happens. We're so blocked that we don't feel God at all. We feel only ourselves. Egypt, which is the filth of the land, the Yisroel, and Israel, the Jewish people, when they were in Egypt, were in exile. Exile, we said before, is planting. And therefore, what happened to the Jewish soul? All the impurity of Egypt seeped into their souls and spiritually paralyzed them and desensitized them, because they became enmeshed in the 49 gates of impurity. It says there are 50 gates of impurity. They reached almost rock bottom. And therefore, they didn't have a sense of, it wasn't revealed to them, and it wasn't, they were now light years away from their grandfather Abraham, or from their great-grandfather Abraham, their great-grandfather Isaac, or their great-father Jacob. They almost lived in complete different zones. Not almost, they did. The Nikolaim, and it wasn't seen, it wasn't revealed to them. The divine energy that's constantly flowing. What does it now mean? Exodus from Egypt. In Yetzias Mitzrayim, what does it mean to go out of Egypt? Sheyatsu, they went out Mitzrayim from the constriction, Mitzrayim, from the narrowness, Ugvulim and limitations, Amalim and Mastirim, that obscure and hide, Ache Kiru, until they were able to recognize B'B'chinas Riyah in a manner that they can see it. How it is, Shemi Bara Ela. That this, what is this? This means all the stuff that there is. Everything. Walk down the street, from the tree to the light pole, to the concrete, to the grass, to the flower, to the bird that's chirping, to the cloud that you see in the sky. All of this is being created. Me bara ela. There is a me that, and when they went out of Egypt, they suddenly opened their eyes and they can see that. They can feel it. Shemi bara ela, this is the divine energy. Amahav, the Talmud that is constantly creating my ayin liyesh from nothing to something. And that's why it says, now we'll understand, this is so exquisitely beautiful. And this is why it says, because in this month, in the month of spring, which is the time when the barley crop is now ripening, kivoy, in this month, Yotzasam and Mitzrayim, you went out of Egypt. Because now the barley is revealing itself. What's the barley? The divine energy that's in the measured divine energy that's in every creation. Pirish boy in it, in the barley, with the barley, Yatzasam and Mitzrayim, you've gone out of Egypt. Meaning, you are now able to enter into the barley, the consciousness of the barley. Now, a barley, as we're going to see, is a very inferior food. Because this is a very inferior level of divine consciousness. See, for us, this is like, wow, I wish I can feel that. I wish I can see everywhere I look that the divine, that God is creating it all. But it's still a very amateur level. Because God's greatness and God's is not that he creates the world. It creates the universe. As we said earlier, it creates the world from nothing. It's no big deal. As I mentioned many times, God doesn't put that he created the world on his resume. Doesn't impress anybody with creating the world. As the Lashem and Chassidus is in other places, this is not the ikar, this is not the primary element of the divine that he creates worlds. It's not a compliment to God that he creates the world. It's quite on the contrary. God has to hide himself and restrict himself a gazillion billion without an end time to be able to emanate the source, that breath that will later become the source of the universe. So if you think that you're beholding God because you behold the hay, you're not even beholding the hay. You're beholding the little crumbs that come from that hay. So even if you would touch the hay, you still haven't even begun your journey. I shouldn't say you haven't begun. You did begin, but you're holding at the bottom rung of the journey. But at least you're on the journey of the divine discovery. Once you bypass the barley, boy, does true infinite light start to open up in front of a person. You journey inward, and you start experiencing true godliness, infinity. Boy, but let's first look what the barley is. Boy, b'pchina sa'ira, in the sa'ira. Why? Because in order to enter the palace, you got to first walk through the gate. What's the gate of the palace? What's the gate is also called shar. We said it earlier. Shar means a gate, an entranceway. You have to walk through the doorway, the entranceway. And what's that entranceway? That's the letter Hey. That's the Shekhinah. That's the godliness of creation. Once you can connect to the godliness of creation, from there you can hop a ride already and go much deeper on a spaceship into the endless and explore the divine light that is above the source of creation. This is the entranceway to Hashem. Sa'ira shir hey. The Sa'ira, which is the shir hey, who ashar v'amava yarish, is the gate, and it's the first entranceway. Hashaboin is barenu nishmas Yisroel ulakus. This was the beginning of the Jewish people becoming refined in their connection to God. B'tzeisam and Mitzrayim, they begin their spiritual refinement. Their first peak, so to speak, their first peak into the divine is in the level of the barley, is the godliness of the measured godliness. So that starts the refinement, because now there's going to be a struggle. There is the old you who didn't know God, who only knew of the self. There is a new you now that does know God, and they're going to battle with each other. The old you is going to say, I'm living in this world to have a good time. Give me back all my physical pleasures and delights so that I can live life just to enjoy myself. The new you that made this new discovery is going to say, what are you talking about? I don't want to live an empty, hollow, self-serving life. I want to serve something bigger than me. I want to connect to that what's beyond the material and physical. For that, I have to give up on my materialistic pleasures. Seek a deeper connection. So that's why he says that this is the refinement. It begins to refine the person. Say some in Mitzrayim when they went out of Egypt, like it says. Now he's going to prove that the first entranceway is through the Malchut, through the barley. As it says, B'zois yavai Aaron ala Kodesh. With this, Aaron should come to holiness. This is a good thing to learn tonight, because tonight is the day before it's going to be Aaron, the high priest's yard site. Tomorrow night, Rosh Chodesh Av, is the yard site of Aaron HaKohen. Today is the entranceway to that. Like it says, with this Aaron should come to holiness. It says in the Zoyar, Da Tara La'Allah. This is the gateway to rise, to go up. This is the gateway. So the Zohar says that this, what is it referring to? There it's referring in Acharei Mos, in Leviticus, it speaks about how to do the service of the temple on Yom Kippur. What is the service in the Holy Temple on Yom Kippur? That the high priest has to do Aro. So the Torah gives him instructions of how he is to come into holiness, that if he has to do A, B, C, D, go through these requirements, and when he checks off all of them, then in this particular way, God says now we can enter into the Holy of Holies. That's the simple meaning of the verse. The Zohar gives a deeper mystical meaning. Bezos Yavo Aaron. That if you, Aaron is referring to the spiritual seeker, every high priest. We all have a high priest inside of us. If you're seeking to entrance, you want to enter into the holiness, you can't ignore the doorway. And what's the entranceway? The entranceway is the Malchut level. You must pass through, just like you can't enter the palace without going through, without going through the. There's an entrance. You have to go through the entrance. Can't go through the wall. Got to go through the entrance. What's the entrance to the divine? The level of Malchut. And what does that mean spiritually? You have to acknowledge God as being a king. This is such an important lesson because a lot of people want to bypass this. If you're egotistical and you're seeking the godly just as a means to empower you more, to become more important for yourself and not to serve God, people like that don't like this condition that you have to go through this entranceway. Why? Because you have to acknowledge that God creates you. And if he creates you, he's your boss. If you're not willing to surrender that and say, God, I'm here, whatever you want, not whatever I want. If you're not willing to do that, don't even enter. Because it's all going to be baloney. All those who claim that they experience spiritual experiences and all that, nothing to do with the divine. Maybe they're tapping spiritual energy, but it's nothing to do with God. To have a genuine connection to God, it has to begin with fear of God. Fear doesn't mean I'm fearing I'm hiding under my bed and I'm anxious. Fear means I'm sensitive to his will. That's what fear means. If he wants something, I'm sensitive to it. I feel it, I acknowledge it, and I surrender to his will. You're willing to do and say, to show up and say, here, God, I'm your servant. Then, oh, you're a servant. Then you get, they have eye recognition, facial recognition. The doors to the divine swing open. Once you accept that you're a servant, you're willing to serve, then they allow you in. Once you're in the inside, you can already go into deeper experiences of love, of ecstasy, and so on. But on the condition that you walk into the divine, acknowledging that God is a king. I'm telling you, it's amazing how many people out there study Kabbalah and mysticism and think they can get in without, because they don't want to restrict their lives. They don't want to keep the mitzvot, because that's a burden. They also don't want to enjoy just the physical, because they know there's a spiritual world. So they want to have what we call the best of both worlds. So let me in without paying the, entry fee. There is an entry fee. God charges to enter. What's the charge? A little humility, a little recognition that you're a servant, and if God calls upon you to do something, you'll do his will. That's what it is. And we have to be ready to surrender ourselves. And that's the meaning of bizos. But here's the thing. That very entranceway, as we said, Shiur, that's the barley. That's that level. Why do I have to listen to God? Because he's creating you. Because he's your boss. Because he's creating you. He's your life force. How can you ignore the power that's creating you? I mean, God gave us free choice, and we can pretend we can ignore him. But realistically, if you acknowledge that he's creating you, and you think about it a little bit, then how dare we defy his will? And we can't move to a higher consciousness before we first register on this level. And that's why we're going to see on the holidays, the first holiday has to be Passover. You can't have the second holiday, Shavuot, which is a higher experience, before this Passover. You have to pass through Passover. Pass through this gate. The Zohar says on the word, this is the entranceway to go into the divine. This is the gate. And the first opening. And what does it mean psychologically? In spiritual service, it's the fear. That's why Judaism demands fear before love. Over here, fear means fear and respect. You respect God's authority. Like the sages say in Masechta Shabbos, page 31. People that think they can study Torah, but they don't have fear of God, fear of heaven. So what are they compared to? These are people that want to be in the inside without going through the door. So the sages say, Gizbar, they are compared to a treasurer, who, if he's treasurer, he has to have access to the treasury. He has to have access to the safes, which are all stored away in the vault. So the sages say this person, because he was appointed treasurer, they gave him the keys to all the vaults, to the safes where all the millions and millions and millions are stashed away. Great, the treasurer. But he has nothing. You know why? Because they forgot to give him, or he forgot to ask you, the key that opens up the outside gate. Can't even get into the bank because he doesn't have the key to the outside gate. So how do you expect? So it's good you have the keys, the inside keys, but if you don't first. So what does that really mean spiritually? The Torah are the inner treasures of the divine. The entrance into the bank is through acknowledgement that God is your God and you're here and you're serving him. If a person studies Torah, but he doesn't have fear of God, which means he doesn't have sensitivity to God's will, and says, I'm living my life, I'm doing what I want, but you know what? I also want to have Torah. Guess what? You can open up a book, you can study Torah, but you're not going anywhere. It's not touching you. It's not inspiring. It's not reaching your neshama. It's not affecting you, or it's not affecting the person. They gave him the internal keys and the outside keys. They didn't give him high aisle. How will he get in there? Because fear. That's the external key. That's the first gate. Which through this you enter the cleave to Hashem. And this is the first experience of the divine, to experience God as the life force of creation, which is the barley, which leads to fear. And this is the meaning that it says, Ki ha'sa'ira, because the barley, aviv. Remember we said that Passover is the time of aviv. Aviv means the first ripe. And it says over there that the barley is the first ripe. And it says, L'moya et Kodesh aviv. To the time that you should celebrate Passover, to the time of the month of the aviv. Even though this is talking about two different things that we discussed last week. One is talking about the holiday of Passover. The other one is talking about one of the plagues that did not destroy the wheat, because the wheat was not yet finished, but the barley was finished and therefore hard. I think that's what it says, and therefore the barley was. But it uses the word aviv for barley and aviv for Pesach, which means Passover is aviv, which is the completion of the barley. So let's take a look at the word aviv. Beautiful. Pirish av aviv hu noitrikin. The word aviv is noitrikin. Noitrikin means it stands for two words. Av, which like tomorrow it fits very well because we're coming into the month of Av, which is also called Av. But over here, it stands for of Yud Beis, the father of Yud Beis. So what does that mean? Yud Beis is 12. Av is father. So Gevalt. Pirish Av, father, is referring to God. Because God is the father of all of existence. The great, great father. He creates everything. It all comes from him. Generates all of existence. He's the father. Definitely the father of all the souls of Israel. Jewish people particularly are called Banim Lamakim, children to Hashem. God says, my firstborn child. Right? Father is referring to God. As we say, Ki ata avinu. There's a verse that says, you are our father. Good. What are the 12? So on a simple level, you can say the 12 tribes. Av Yud Beis means that God is the father of the 12 tribes. Well, what does that mean? What does that mean? What does it have to do with spring? What does it have to do with Pesach? Passover has to be. Because before Passover, while we were still in Egypt, we didn't even recognize we had a father. The world felt our consciousness was so blocked that we thought we create ourselves. We exist because we exist. We had no sense that there is a father creating us. The going out of Egypt unblocked us. And when we became unblocked, now Israel, which is made up of 12 tribes, can cleave and bond to their father. Through what? Through the barley. I mean, this is an amateur. This is an elementary consciousness. This is kindergarten. This is the first lesson, preschool. What are we learning? We're learning we have a father. But he's going to take it more. The 12 doesn't only mean the tribes of Israel, getting a chance to bond with their father. But the 12 also is referring to the 12 months, the 12 zodiacs. The 12, and according to mysticism, it's really in the book of Yecheskel, it says already that there are 4 beasts in the chariot, in the divine chariot, and each of those 4 beasts are multiplied by 3, because there's 3 faces. 3, so 4 times 3 is 12. So now you have 12, or in the Yud Beis Bakar, also in the temple. There was a pool of water that King Solomon made, and it was carried by 12 cattle, which was representing the spiritual flow of energy. When the divine energy flows to the universe, it first splinters into 12 angelic forces. And then from there, that's like the mother of within these 12, they're already creations. They're not God, God forbid. They're not God, they're created. They're holy angels. But from them evolve all the various different creatures that there are, spiritual and physical. Everything comes from these 12. So, of Yud Beis means that the creation is not blocked from its father. God, being the father of creation, is connecting to Yud Beis, to the 12, to the 4 directions, if we might say, to the power of the 12 original creations, so that creation becomes conscious of the Creator. When is this enabled? When we went out of Egypt. When is that? Passover. Aviv. Because that's when the barley is finished, which means that's when we can sense how we're created by the shiur hay, by the measured light coming from the hay, from that one letter of God. As he says, so Av is our father. Yud Beis, Yud Beis Bakar, these are the 12 cattle. And it's when King Solomon made the depiction of what's going on in the spiritual realms in the Holy Temple, he had these 12, I think they were made out of gold or copper or bronze, I'm not exactly sure. And on top of them, there was a pool, and in the pool was water, and it was called the sea. So it's almost like these 12 cattle are carrying this pool. So spiritually, what does that mean? The sea represents the divine. 12 cattle represents the first recipients of the divine energy as it's entering into the universe. Now, sometimes the sea, which is divine, is cut off from the consciousness of the recipients. That's when we're in Egypt. When we're not in Egypt, the 12 cattle, which are the first creations, are highly conscious of their spiritual life force that's creating them on a very, very powerful level, which then later that means that down here below, we also become super conscious of God. The more consciousness there is up there, the more intense it is, the more it translates into the ability to feel Hashem down here. The 5 beasts of the chariots, each one has 3 included. Which is the root also of the 12 tribes. The Tevis Aviv, and the meaning of the word Aviv, Moira ala Chibur, it indicates on the attachment, Yud Bei Shvatim of these 12 tribes, Lipchenas Avu HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the attachment of the tribes. He says the first thing that we said earlier. The tribes of Israel are now attached to God. The Chsiv Bei, it says by him, Ki Ata Avinu, you are our father. Now he's going to say, not only are we interpreting the word Aviv in an unusual way that is hinting to this bond, we're saying that the word Aviv is Av Yud Beis. Okay, it's nice, but is that really what the word on the simple meaning means? So Aviv means spring, but he's going to bring over here another verse that the word Aviv also means attachment. As he says, Ki Aviv Lashem Chibur. Aviv also has the meaning of the word chibur, attachment. Maloshin kishus she'esliya ba'aveha. A kishus is a type of vegetable. It's not a leek. What is a kishus? Maybe is it a squash? Yeah, I think it's a squash, maybe. What? Yeah, could be it's a squash. You know that your wife speaks Hebrew. A squash that became wormy be'ibeha while it was still attached. That's what the sages use. So you see the word ibeha, like eBay, and that's what eBay is, really, think about it. It's a way to attach people that want to sell, buyer and seller. See, I gave a new interpretation now on eBay. Pirish be'ibeha ba'oida muchaberes lekarka, when it's still attached to the ground. Comes out that the word Aviv, in addition to it meaning Av Yud Beis, the father is connected, but the word Aviv means attachment. Attachment of who? The father to the 12. Uksiv, now he's going to connect it to something else as well. In order to help facilitate this acknowledgement, this recognition, this bond between creator and creation, between father and child, in order to be able to intensify it, God gave us a special diet during that week. When Passover comes, which is the time of the barley, God gives us a diet. It's not a diet necessarily of barley, but it is a diet that will help facilitate and bring forth this. And it says, Shivas yamim teichel matzah, 7 days you should eat matzah. That's the matzah diet, the unleavened bread. At the time of the month of the Aviv. Pidish, what does that mean? Matzah, through the eating of the bread of the matzah, this is what enables and facilitates this Aviv, this bond. The attachment of the souls of Israel to God. Because the sages say, what does it have to do with matzah? The answer is, watch this. The sages say, that a child does not know how to call father. Children, they nurse, they eat all kinds of mushed baby food. But like there's a certain, when they start eating grain or product made up of grain, oatmeal maybe, and things like that, that has a certain advancement in the maturing of the child, that the child can start calling out daddy. Child does not know his father until, I guess mom he knows earlier because mom is nursing, so that's very, very intrinsic. But father takes a little bit more disconnected. So he needs to kind of learn and to be able to call out father. That helps. That's not from the nursing. That's the child needs to have a development of the mind that comes from grain. Say Abba, and through this the child can say dad. Now, that does not mean that the child knows what we call the facts of life of how this man is my father. And we hope the child doesn't have to find out when they're very young, get a little older, they have enough time to learn about that. But when they're very young, right, what does the child know? And the child doesn't have the deep psychological understanding of parent and child. The child doesn't know any of all of that, but the child knows the essence. What's the essence? This is my dad. That's it. That's the essence. Everything else is already commentary. This, that. The child knows the point. This is my dad. This is the guy. This is the person who will give his life for me. This is my dad. Even that is already too much explanation. He just knows. He knows. He's deeply attached to this individual. And even though he doesn't understand Lamu Aviv, why he's his father, like the adult. Get older, you understand that he was somehow responsible for bringing you into the world. But nevertheless, the fact that he doesn't know the why, the what, the when, that doesn't weaken the bond. Quite on the contrary. The little child, when he cries, daddy, the little 2-year-old or 1-year-old, or cries for his father. A lot of times dads, when they leave the house and they have to leave, I remember my little ones would cry by the door, like when I leave, and they went, Ubigaguyim, with such longing. Father sometimes leaves, the child doesn't want, the child makes a temper tantrum. He wants his dad. More than the sophisticated adult that knows all the science behind it. Doesn't have that longing. Which means the essence, it's a certain recognition in the deepest part of their soul that I belong to this person. That's when the child says daddy. Watch a dad go pick up his 3-year-old from playgroup the first time she goes like to school, not even before school, and the child sees the dad, they run and they leap into the dad's arms. Daddy, calling out Abba. That bond is essence. It captures the full depth of the bond between the child, more than 10 books written on parent-child. That's it. That's the essence of it. What gives that child that recognition? You need grain. Grain. Why? Something about grain that opens up the mind to be able to have this sensitivity, this awareness. From the 5. Now, grain has to be from one of the 5 different types of grain. This is physically. Physically. When I say physically, it means in our physical relationships of parent to child, and the physical grain. Now we also have a daddy, our great big daddy, which is God. The same is also understood spiritually. Matzah, through the eating. So every year God tells us, eat matzah. So through the eating of the matzah, al yedei zeh mischazik akriyas Abba Lavinu Shebashamayim. This strengthens the crying of Father to our Father in heaven. We also want to cry, Daddy, with a deep, deep, deep recognition that we have a deep bond with God. See Him as our Father. So God gives us a special food that we eat physically, but in that physical food, in that matzah, God is delivering that spiritual, that godly ingredient to open up the soul to this consciousness. The consciousness, as we spoke of the barley, the consciousness that God is the creator and the source of our existence. That's what a father means, the source of your existence. And even if it's not going to be sophisticated, you're not going to walk out after eating matzah, a big Kabbalist, and know the entire evolution of how God creates the world. No, not at all. But your soul has, by eating that matzah for 7 days, has now been strengthened in a very deep way to recognize God. Now, but then you're going to ask, when it comes to, why does it have to be matzah? Why can't it be just bread? The child gets to know his dad, his or her dad, through any grain. Suddenly over here we say, no, it's got to be matzah. Why matzah? Unleavened bread. Because for your relationship with God, it won't work any other way but matzah. Why? So we said over here there's a particular, why don't we naturally feel our God? Why don't we just naturally know He's our Father? As we said, because when we were in Egypt, and the Egypt comes from becoming defiled, and Egypt is not only back then, today there's still a lot of remnants of Egypt. A lot of dark stuff that we're living around. A lot of temptations, a lot of stuff, which cause and then God forbid if a person sins, all of that causes a lot of blockages in a person's soul. What's the source of all blockage? The source of all blockage is overinflated self-importance, ego. When a person becomes too inflated with self and obsessed with self, you can't feel anything but yourself. Very, very dangerous. Therefore, the remedy of is to deflate that ego, to flatten it. And that's what a matzah is. A matzah is a flat bread. It's a bread that didn't rise. So eating the matzah, which is a mitzvah, it's not just eating any flat bread. You have to eat the matzah. And on the days that God says it's a mitzvah to eat the matzah, it flattens the ego. As a spiritual, it flattens the ego and generates a genuine, real, deep soul sensitivity and awareness of God. Not a sophisticated awareness, but a real sense that there is a creator. The hine matzah v'chametz, and he's explaining it over here. Matzah and chametz. Matzah is the word for the flattened bread, the matzah. Chametz is leaven, and we know on Passover we know we chase away the chametz. The truth is that matzah and chametz have the same. They couldn't be further from apart. One of them is the mitzvah to eat. The other one, you're not allowed to have it. Tiny, you eat a little bit of the chametz. You eat a little leavened bread, it's punishable by death, by excision. The soul gets cut off. That's how serious it is during those 7 days of Pesach. And we know we chase away every crumb, we clean, we scrub. Chametz is like the worst thing. How can it be this? So what's interesting is that the word chametz and the word matzah are both 3-letter words, and 2 out of the 3 letters are exactly the same. Chametz is as ches mem tzadik, and matzah is mem tzadik hey. So the mem and the tzadik are there. These are 2 letters. The difference is only that in chametz it starts with a ches, and matzah ends with a hey. So the only different letter is the hey versus the ches. Now, if you know Hebrew letters, you'll know that that's even more astounding, that the hey and the ches are almost exact same letters. So the chametz and the matzah are actually most closer than what you thought. It's not only 2/3 of the word, 2/3 of its spiritual ingredients are the same, but even the last third that makes them different is almost the same, because there are letters. The only difference between the ches and the hey is that the ches is closed on the top, and the hey is open on the top. What's the difference? The hey has a little window. The little window means it allows divine consciousness to come in. The ches is shutting that window. You shut that window, you're living inside a narrow constriction, and you don't have a window, so all you have is darkness. A window brings in the light. Close the window and it's dark. And therefore, from the darkness, when you're living in darkness, what is that? It's chametz. What's chametz? Inflated. When one is not aware of the outside, you become closed off in yourself. You only know yourself. You're not conscious at all of the cosmic energy. Stuck in self because it's closed, it's dark. Open up a little window, allow a little godliness to come, and you become conscious of God. Suddenly the ego goes down. It becomes flat because you become humble. You sense there's something bigger than you. You're serving something bigger than yourself. And you're questioning, am I serving even? Am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? I said that deflates the ego. And now once the ego is deflated, the more you can feel God. And as you have matzah now. So matzah is the best diet you can eat in the time of Aviv, when we have to experience attachment of father to the 12. That's why it says you should eat the matzah in the month of Aviv, because that's l'moyed chodesh av, to the time of the Aviv, because that's the whole point over here, to bond the two. That's what we're learning over here. Matzah and chametz are the same letters. Shehafresh, the difference is chametz u'beches. Chametz has a ches, matzah behei has a hey. The bread of chametz is inflated bread. Shemaylam, a master that hides and obscures ala ayin alaki, on the hidden godliness, hashafeim ayin liyesh, that is flowing from nothing to something. Ma'ashenke matzah, which isn't the case with matzah. Ubchenas lechem is bread. Shebebchenas bittul, that's in a state of bittul v'shiflas. It's a humble bread. It's a humble bread, and therefore, what does it do when you eat it? She'enei master alayin alaki. It doesn't obscure the divine energy that's creating. It's bringing the world in from nothing to something. On the contrary, through the eating of matzah, it intensifies. The matzah, first of all, you're getting the ego out of the way. Plus, since it's bread, which bread makes a child know his father, so we're all children in front of God, by eating that matzah, which has the grain, and it's not a inflated one. You move that away, and you're left with the quality of the bread without the negative of the inflation of the bread. So what does that do? Then the grain will come and intensify the recognition and the grasp that God is our Father. Just like the physical bread. Satiates a person's heart. So to the bread of matzah, supports and strengthens the heart of a person. Enosh also means a weak heart becomes strengthened. To get strength, and a recognition, like a person literally sees the me that creates the Eila. Which is a divine energy that creates constantly from nothing to something. Which this is what it means that through the bread of matzah. This is what creates the time of the month of Aviv. What's Aviv? Chibur. Aviv means attachment. Between who? Between Av, Yud Beis, between the father and the 12, which is the 12 tribes. And now he's going to give another interpretation. That Aviv means Meloshen Av. The word Aviv, in addition to meaning attachment, also means father. And in the sense, over here it means that this is the father to all the other holidays. See, till now we were looking at the word Aviv, and even if we meant father, but it wasn't father in relation to the other holidays. It was just father because it connects father and child. That's what Passover. Now he's saying that it's from all the 3 holidays, this is the father of the holidays. And he explains. It's the father of the holidays doesn't mean it's the greatest. If father over here means that just like you can't have a child and then a grandchild without a father, so too, you can't have the next stages, which are really greater. We're soon going to see that Shavuot is much higher level of godly access. And Sukkot is even higher. Incredible growth in the produce. But you need to, as we said earlier, you need to walk through the doorway. You can't go to the higher level without going through the Pesach. So that's why it's called the Father. Pesach is the Father to all the holidays. Shagam, even though Shavuos v'Sukkos, that Shavuos and Sukkos Gavoyim Yosim Mimenu are higher from Pesach, from Passover, Makom Makom. You cannot arrive to Shavuos and Sukkos. First, you have to have the holiday of Passover. But it's the father of all the holidays. Pesach is the first Pesach. It says Hashem will leap over the Pesach. Pesach is the first entranceway. Like we said earlier, when it says every person that has Torah, and he doesn't have fear of heaven, that person is compared, as we said earlier, to a treasurer who wasn't given the key, the outside lock. How will he enter? This is the entrance. The entrance is fear of God. The which is the experience of Passover, recognition that you have a father, you have a king, you have a creator who created you, and you acknowledge that. And you're accepting to play the role of a creation, which is to serve its creator. And that's, remember we said today, it's either his grain or her grain. It says the Jewish people are the beginning of her grain. Tvuas hay. So the barley is particularly the tvua of the hay, sa'ira shir hay, because in God itself, it's the lowest level. It's the hay of God's name. So we're going to see Shavuot. We're achieving a much higher level, which is coming from God as He's beyond being the source for creation. That's the vav. This is the fear. This is peso. What's really interesting is that, as we said earlier, the real crop that's going to grow is only going to be in the time of the redemption, time of Moshiach. That's when you're going to have the full revelation of godly light that's going to hit us so strong. But now we get little previews. On every Passover, we have a little barley, maybe a lot of barley, but still a little compared to what is going to be revealed. The consciousness that is going to, the download that's going to happen then. But now we got a little. Okay, now we're going to stop. And we're going to on next week, Thursday, Bezrat Hashem, we're going to learn about the next two paragraphs that talk about the next stage, which is Shavuot. And that's called the holiday of the harvest, the cutting of the wheat. And then finally, we're going to learn about Sukkot, Bezrat Hashem. Okay. Everyone, we should merit already that the month of coming to us, this Shabbos, should already be inside. Everything should flip over already with God's help.